The clipboard trembled in her hands as she stared at what my backyard had become. Karen's face turned 3 different shades of red, while dozens of tiny frogs croaked their victory song from my former swimming pool. "You cannot do this," she screamed, her voice cracking with desperation. "This violates every HOA regulation we have." I smiled and held up a thick folder of environmental protection documents. "Actually, Karen, it turns out that federal wildlife conservation laws trump your little rule book. Every single one of these frogs is now under government protection." The woman who had spent 6 months making my life a living hell over pool permits was about to learn that sometimes the hunter becomes the hunted. That was the moment I realized that the best revenge is not getting mad. It is getting creative. 3 years ago, I bought my dream house. After decades of apartment living and saving every penny, I finally had a place to call my own. The best part was not the granite countertops or the hardwood floors. It was the sparkling blue swimming pool in my backyard. That pool was my sanctuary. Every evening after work, I would dive into the cool water and let the stress of the day wash away. Summer weekends meant barbecues with friends, kids splashing and laughing, and the simple joy of floating on my back while watching clouds drift across the sky. I had worked 2 jobs for 15 years to afford this house. The pool represented everything I had sacrificed for: freedom, success, the American dream made real in chlorinated water and concrete. My neighbors seemed friendly enough. The Johnsons next door would wave over the fence while I swam my evening laps. Mrs. Martinez across the street often complimented my landscaping efforts. Even the young couple with twin toddlers would smile and chat when our paths crossed during morning dog walks. The HOA notices came in the mail every month, but I barely paid attention to them. Standard stuff about trash pickup schedules and community meetings. I figured as long as I kept my grass cut and did not paint my house hot pink, everything would be fine. Looking back, I should have read those notices more carefully. I should have attended at least one community meeting. I should have known that beneath the surface of our peaceful neighborhood, a storm was brewing. The first warning sign came on a Tuesday evening in July. I was floating on an inflatable raft, cold beer in hand, when I noticed someone standing at my back gate. A woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and a clipboard pressed against her chest was staring at me through the chain-link fence. She did not wave. She did not smile. She just stood there for a full minute, writing something down on her clipboard with sharp, angry strokes. When I called out to ask if she needed something, she turned and walked away without a word. That night, I found a bright yellow notice taped to my front door. It was my first introduction to Section 4.7 of the HOA bylaws regarding recreational water feature usage and community standards compliance. I read it twice and still had no idea what it meant. Little did I know that woman with the clipboard was about to turn my peaceful paradise into a battlefield. Her name was Karen Mitchell, and she had big plans for my pool. Karen Mitchell arrived at my front door the following Saturday morning like a general preparing for war. She wore a navy blue blazer despite the 90-degree heat, carried a leather portfolio that looked thick enough to contain the Constitution, and had the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. "Good morning," she said, though her tone suggested it was anything but good. "I am Karen Mitchell, president of the Willowbrook Community HOA Board. We need to discuss your pool situation." I invited her in for coffee, thinking this would be a simple conversation between neighbors. Karen declined the coffee but accepted my invitation to sit in the living room. She opened her portfolio and pulled out a stack of papers that must have been 20 pages thick. "According to our recent property inspection, Your swimming pool is being operated without proper HOA recreational facility permits, she began, reading from her notes like a prosecutor presenting evidence. Additionally, you have failed to submit required safety documentation, usage schedules, and community impact assessments. I stared at her in confusion. I am sorry, but what kind of permits do I need for my own pool? It came with the house when I bought it. Karen's smile became even more artificial. The previous owner was grandfathered under old regulations. However, any change in property ownership triggers a full compliance review. You have been living here for 3 years without proper documentation. She slid a thick packet of forms across my coffee table. These are the applications you need to complete. There is a $200 processing fee for each form, plus inspection costs and administrative charges. The total comes to approximately $1,500. My jaw dropped. $1,500 for my own pool. Community standards exist for a reason, Karen replied, her voice taking on a lecturing tone. Unregulated swimming facilities can impact property values, create noise disturbances, and pose liability risks for the entire neighborhood. The HOA board takes these matters very seriously. I tried to remain calm and reasonable. Karen, I understand the need for community standards, but this seems excessive. My pool does not bother anyone. It is in my backyard behind a privacy fence. Karen closed her portfolio with a sharp snap. Rules are rules. You have 30 days to submit all required documentation or face penalty fees of $50 per day until compliance is achieved. After she left, I sat in my living room staring at the mountain of paperwork. Pool usage logs, neighbor impact statements, safety equipment inventories, chemical treatment schedules, insurance documentation. The list went on and on. That evening, I called my neighbor Mr. Johnson to ask if he had ever dealt with anything like this. His voice dropped to a whisper when I mentioned Karen's name. She went after the Petersons last year over their garden gnomes, he said. Cost them $800 in fines and legal fees before they finally gave up and moved the gnomes to their front porch. Karen said they violated the community aesthetic standards. Garden gnomes. I could not believe what I was hearing. Last month she made the Williams family remove their children's swing set because it was 3 inches too close to the property line. Before that, she forced Mrs. Chen to repaint her mailbox because the shade of blue was not on the approved color list. A cold realization washed over me. I was not dealing with reasonable community oversight. I was dealing with a power-hungry tyrant who had turned HOA regulations into her personal weapon of neighborhood control. That night I could not sleep. Through my bedroom window, I could see the moonlight reflecting off my pool water. The peaceful sanctuary that had brought me so much joy was about to become the center of a war I never wanted to fight. But Karen Mitchell had made one crucial mistake. She assumed I would roll over and surrender like everyone else. She had no idea that she had just picked a fight with someone who had spent 15 years working 2 jobs to earn the right to swim in his own backyard. The next morning, I dove headfirst into the HOA bylaws like a man possessed. What I discovered was worse than I could have imagined. The Willowbrook Community Regulations read like a manual for controlling every aspect of human existence. Section 12.3 required written permission to change your landscaping. Section 8.7 mandated pre-approval for any outdoor decorations, including holiday lights. Section 15.4 restricted the hours when homeowners could operate power tools, play music, or even have conversations in their own backyards. but the pool regulations were in a league of their own. According to the bylaws, any recreational water feature required monthly water quality reports, quarterly safety inspections, and annual environmental impact assessments. Pool parties with more than 6 people needed advance notification to all neighbors within a 100-foot radius. The documentation requirements were absurd. I needed to maintain logs of every person who used the pool, including their names, addresses, and relationship to me. Chemical treatments had to be recorded with timestamps and photographs. Even the pool cleaning schedule required HOA board approval. I started making phone calls to other homeowners who had dealt with Karen's enforcement campaigns. The stories I heard made my blood boil. The Martinez family had been fined $300 for having their garage door open during non-approved hours. Karen claimed it created an eyesore that violated community appearance standards. Tom Wilson down the street received violation notices for parking his work truck in his own driveway. Karen said commercial vehicles were prohibited in residential areas, even though Tom used the truck to commute to his construction job. The young couple with twins had been forced to remove their children's playhouse because it exceeded the maximum allowed height for temporary structures by 4 inches. Every story followed the same pattern. Karen would show up with her clipboard, cite some obscure regulation, and demand immediate compliance. When homeowners tried to fight back, she would bury them in paperwork, fines, and threats of legal action. Most people eventually gave up and paid whatever Karen demanded. It was easier than fighting a system designed to wear them down through bureaucratic attrition. But the worst part was discovering that Karen had created most of these regulations herself. As HOA board president, she had spent years adding new rules and restrictions, building herself a paper empire where she reigned as absolute dictator. I spent the next 2 weeks trying to comply with her demands. I filled out forms, paid fees, and scheduled inspections. Every time I thought I was close to completion, Karen would find new requirements that needed to be addressed. The pool usage log alone was a nightmare. I had to document every swim, including duration, activities performed, and weather conditions. When I submitted my first week of logs, Karen rejected them because my handwriting was not legible enough for official records. The safety inspection revealed 14 different violations that needed immediate correction. My pool ladder was the wrong color. The depth markers were positioned incorrectly. The pool skimmer basket did not meet current HOA specifications. Each violation came with its own correction fee, reinspection cost, and administrative charge. The expenses were mounting quickly, and I had not even been approved to use my own pool yet. The breaking point came when Karen delivered a new requirement that made my head spin. She wanted me to install a 6-foot privacy fence around the pool area to prevent neighbors from seeing the recreational activities taking place in my backyard. I already had a perfectly good fence, but according to Karen's latest interpretation of the community standards, my existing fence was 2 inches too short and the wrong shade of brown. The cost estimate for the new fence came to $4,500. Combined with all the other fees, fines, and requirements Karen had imposed, I was looking at nearly $8,000 in expenses just to use the pool I already owned. That night, I sat in my backyard staring at the water that had once brought me so much peace. The pool looked the same, but everything else had changed. Karen had turned my sanctuary into a source of stress, frustration, and financial strain. I was trapped in a system designed to make compliance impossible and resistance futile. Karen held all the cards, and I was running out of money to play her game. But sometimes when you are backed into a corner with no way out, the only option left is to change the game entirely. The final straw came on a sweltering Saturday afternoon in August. My sister and her family were visiting from out of state, and her two young kids had been looking forward to swimming in Uncle Mike's pool all week. I had spent 3 weeks jumping through Karen's hoops, paying her fees, and following her ridiculous protocols just to get temporary permission for a family gathering. I had submitted the guest list, filed the recreational activity notice, and even paid a $50 special event processing fee for the privilege of hosting my own family in my own backyard. The kids were already in their swimsuits, running around the pool deck with the pure joy that only children can possess. My sister was setting up a picnic lunch while my brother-in-law inflated pool floats. For the first time in months, my backyard felt like home again. That was when Karen appeared at my back gate like a storm cloud, rolling across a sunny sky. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice cutting through the children's laughter like a knife. "I need to speak with you immediately." I walked over to the gate, trying to maintain my composure in front of my family. "What can I do for you, Karen?" She held up her ever-present clipboard with the satisfaction of someone who had just caught a criminal in the act. "Your guest registration form lists 4 adults and 2 children. I count 5 adults in your backyard." I looked back at my family, confused. "No, there are only 4 adults. My sister, her husband, myself, and—" "The woman in the red bikini," Karen interrupted, pointing at my sister. "She is not listed on your approved guest roster." My brain struggled to process what I was hearing. "Karen, that is my sister. She is on the list. Jennifer Walsh from Phoenix, Arizona." Karen shook her head with the confidence of someone who knew she was right. "The form clearly states Jennifer Walsh and family. The woman in the red bikini is obviously not family." "She is my sister." I could feel my voice rising, but I could not help it. "She is Jennifer Walsh." "I need to see identification," Karen demanded, "and I will require updated documentation reflecting the correct guest information." My 6-year-old nephew chose that moment to cannonball into the pool, sending a splash of water over the fence that landed on Karen's clipboard. She jerked backward as if she had been attacked. "This is exactly the kind of unsafe behavior that requires proper supervision protocols," she snapped. "I am issuing an immediate cease and desist order for all pool activities until this situation is resolved." Something inside me snapped. I had reached the end of my rope with this woman's insanity. "Karen, you need to leave, now." She clutched her clipboard to her chest like a shield. "I am acting in my official capacity as HOA board president. You cannot force me to leave." "This is my property," I said, my voice steady but filled with barely controlled rage. "You are not welcome here." Karen's face turned bright red. "We will see about that. I am calling an emergency HOA board meeting for tonight. Your pool privileges will be suspended pending a full investigation of this incident." As she stormed away, my sister walked up beside me. "Mike, who was that crazy woman?" I watched Karen disappear around the corner, her clipboard clutched against her chest like a weapon. "That was the person who is about to learn that she picked the wrong fight with the wrong guy." That night, after my family had gone back to their hotel, I sat alone in my backyard staring at the pool that had become a battlefield. Karen had won this round, but the war was far from over. I pulled out my laptop and started researching. If Karen wanted to play games with regulations and bylaws, I would learn to play that game better than she ever could. But I would not play by her rules. 3 hours later, I found exactly what I was looking for. Buried deep in the county environmental protection codes was a section about natural habitat preservation and wildlife conservation. A slow smile spread across my face as I read through the regulations. Karen had spent months using bureaucracy as a weapon against me. Now it was time to turn that weapon around and show her what real regulatory compliance looked like. I opened a new browser tab and started researching pond construction, native plant species, and amphibian habitat requirements. If Karen wanted my pool to comply with every possible regulation, I was going to give her compliance she would never forget. By midnight, I had a plan that was so brilliant in its simplicity that I could barely contain my excitement. Karen had made one fatal mistake in her campaign against me. She had assumed that I would keep fighting for the right to have a swimming pool. But what if I did not want a swimming pool anymore? What if I wanted something that was protected by laws that trumped every single HOA regulation in Karen's precious rule book? The next morning, I made a phone call that would change everything. Monday morning, I called the County Environmental Services Department and spoke with a specialist named Dr. Sarah Chen. When I explained my situation, she was more helpful than I could have hoped. "You want to convert your swimming pool into a natural amphibian habitat?" she asked, and I could hear the interest in her voice. "That is actually a wonderful idea. We have been encouraging more residential conservation projects." Dr. Chen explained that natural ponds and wetlands were protected under both state and federal environmental laws. Once established as a wildlife habitat, the pond would fall under the jurisdiction of environmental protection agencies, not HOA regulations. "The process is straightforward," she continued. "You will need to register the habitat with our department, but there are no fees involved. In fact, you might qualify for tax incentives as part of the residential conservation program." I could barely contain my excitement as she walked me through the requirements. Native plants, natural filtration systems, and habitat features that would attract local amphibians and birds. Everything Karen had made difficult about owning a pool, the environmental agency was eager to support for a pond. The next step was finding a contractor who specialized in natural pond construction. I found Green Earth Landscaping, a company that had built dozens of residential wildlife habitats. The owner, Marcus, came out that afternoon to assess the project. "This is perfect," he said, walking around my pool. "The existing structure gives us a great foundation. We can transform this into something beautiful in about 2 weeks." Marcus explained the process. First, they would drain the pool and remove all the artificial elements. Then they would add natural stone, soil, and native plants. The filtration system would be replaced with a biological system using beneficial bacteria and aquatic plants. "The best part," Marcus said with a grin, "is that once we introduce the frogs, they will be protected by law. No one can force you to remove a registered wildlife habitat." I signed the contract that afternoon and paid the deposit with money I had been saving for Karen's ridiculous fees. The irony was delicious. Instead of spending thousands of dollars to comply with her regulations, I was investing in something that would make her regulations completely irrelevant. The work began on Wednesday morning. I took the day off to watch the transformation begin. The crew arrived at 7 a.m. with trucks full of natural stone, native plants, and specialized equipment. The first step was draining the pool. As thousands of gallons of chlorinated water flowed into the storm drainage system, I felt like I was washing away months of frustration and stress. With each inch the water level dropped, Karen's power over me diminished. By noon, the concrete pool looked like an empty crater in my backyard. But Marcus had vision where I saw destruction. He pointed out where different types of plants would go, where the shallow areas would provide frog breeding grounds, and where the deeper sections would offer fish habitat. "It is going to be spectacular," he assured me. "You will have birds, frogs, dragonflies, and maybe even some small fish. This will be a genuine ecosystem in your backyard." That afternoon, Karen appeared at my fence right on schedule. She had probably been watching from her window, waiting for the perfect moment to deliver another clipboard full of violations. "What do you think you are doing?" she demanded, staring at the construction crew working around my empty pool. I walked over to the fence with a folder of my own. "I am converting my swimming pool into a natural wildlife habitat pond. All the paperwork is right here." Karen's face went through several interesting color changes as she processed this information. "You cannot just destroy your pool without HOA approval. This violates multiple community standards." "Actually," I said, pulling out Dr. Chen's letter, "this project is being conducted under county environmental protection guidelines. Federal and state conservation laws supersede local HOA regulations." I watched Karen's confidence crumble as she read the official documentation. Her clipboard seemed suddenly inadequate against government letterhead and environmental protection statutes. "This is not over," she said, but her voice lacked its usual authority. "I will find a way to stop this." "Good luck with that," I replied, turning back to watch the crew install the first load of natural stone. "You might want to call the EPA and explain why you are opposed to wildlife conservation." As Karen stormed away, Marcus looked up from his work and grinned. "I take it that was the HOA lady you told me about." "That was her," I confirmed. "And I think she is starting to realize that she is not the biggest fish in this pond anymore." Karen's counterattack came faster than I expected. By Thursday morning, I had received 3 different violation notices, a demand for an emergency HOA hearing, and a threatening letter from a lawyer claiming I was in breach of community covenants. But I was ready for her. Dr. Chen had connected me with an environmental lawyer named James Rodriguez who specialized in conservation law. When I showed him Karen's threats, he actually laughed out loud. "She cannot touch you," he said, reviewing my documentation. "Your pond is now registered as a certified wildlife habitat under both state and federal protection. Any attempt to interfere with the project would violate environmental protection laws." James drafted a response letter that was a masterpiece of legal precision. He explained that my pond was protected under the Endangered Species Act, the Clean Water Act, and 3 different state conservation statutes. Any HOA interference could result in federal penalties of up to $10,000 per violation. The letter concluded with a warning that made me smile. "We trust that your client will not wish to become the subject of a federal environmental protection enforcement action." Meanwhile, the pond transformation was progressing beautifully. The crew had installed a stunning array of natural stone that created different depth levels and hiding places for aquatic creatures. Native water plants were already taking root, and the biological filtration system was creating crystal clear water without any chemicals. Marcus brought the first batch of frogs on Friday afternoon. They were tiny tree frogs, barely bigger than my thumbnail, but they represented something much larger than their size suggested. They were my legal army, protected by the full force of federal law. "Give them a few weeks to settle in," Marcus explained as we released them into their new home. "Once they start breeding, you will have dozens of frogs, and every single one of them will be a protected species. That evening, Karen showed up at my fence with what looked like half the HOA board in tow. There were 5 people total, all carrying clipboards and wearing expressions of righteous indignation. "We demand that you stop this destruction immediately," Karen announced, pointing at my beautiful new pond. "You are in violation of Section 4.7, Section 12.3, and Section 18.2 of the community bylaws." I had been expecting this moment, and I was prepared. I walked over to the fence carrying a folder thick with legal documents and environmental protection certificates. "Karen, I would like you to meet my lawyer," I said, pulling out my phone and calling James on speaker. "He has something to explain to you about federal environmental law." James's voice came through clearly as he addressed the group. "Ladies and gentlemen, the pond you are looking at is now a registered wildlife habitat protected under multiple federal statutes. Any attempt to interfere with this conservation project would constitute a federal crime." One of the board members, an older man I did not recognize, stepped forward nervously. "But surely HOA regulations take precedence in a residential community." "I am afraid not," James replied patiently. "Environmental protection laws are federal statutes that supersede all local regulations. Your HOA bylaws are legally irrelevant in this matter." Karen's face was turning red again, but this time it was the red of panic rather than anger. "There has to be something we can do. He is destroying property values. He is violating the community aesthetic standards." "What I am seeing," James continued, "is a beautiful example of residential conservation that will likely increase property values and provide significant environmental benefits to the entire community." The other board members were starting to look uncomfortable. They had clearly expected this to be a simple enforcement action, not a confrontation with federal environmental law. "Furthermore," James added, "I should mention that any harassment of my client regarding this legal conservation project could result in additional legal action for interference with protected wildlife habitat." That was the moment when Karen completely lost control. Her voice rose to a shriek as she pointed at my pond. "This is not about conservation. This is about defying HOA authority. He is doing this to spite me." "Ma'am," James said calmly, "my client's motivations are irrelevant. The fact remains that he is conducting a legal wildlife conservation project that is protected by federal law." The older board member grabbed Karen's arm and whispered urgently in her ear. I could not hear what he was saying, but Karen's expression suggested she was being advised to retreat. "This is not over," Karen said, but her voice had lost all its authority. She sounded like a defeated general making empty threats. As the group walked away, I could hear heated discussions and worried voices. The other board members were clearly having second thoughts about following Karen into a legal battle they could not win. That night, I sat beside my new pond listening to the gentle sound of the water feature and the soft croaking of my tiny frog residents. For the first time in months, my backyard felt peaceful again. But the best part was yet to come. Over the next few days, word spread through the neighborhood about my legal victory over the HOA. I started getting visitors who wanted to see the pond and hear the story of how I had beaten Karen at her own game. The transformation was complete. My backyard had become a symbol of successful resistance against bureaucratic tyranny. 6 months later, my backyard has become something I never could have imagined when this whole ordeal began. The pond is now a thriving ecosystem that attracts dozens of different species of birds, butterflies, and aquatic life. What started as an act of revenge has become a source of genuine pride and joy. The frogs have multiplied beyond my wildest expectations. Every evening, their chorus fills the air with natural music that is far more beautiful than any pool filter ever sounded. During the day, I watch dragonflies dance over the water surface while birds come to drink and bathe in the shallow areas. My neighbors love the transformation. Mrs. Martinez brings her grandchildren over to see the frogs and learn about different plant species. The young couple with twins has asked Marcus to design a similar pond for their backyard. Even Mr. Johnson admits that the pond is more interesting than a swimming pool ever was. The environmental benefits have exceeded everyone's expectations. Dr. Chen from the County Environmental Services Department featured my pond in their newsletter as an example of successful residential conservation. The tax incentives I received actually saved me more money than I spent on the entire project. But the most satisfying outcome has been watching Karen's influence in the neighborhood completely collapse. 3 months after my legal victory, she resigned from the HOA board following a vote of no confidence from other homeowners. Apparently, several board members had been looking for an excuse to remove her from power, and my case provided the perfect opportunity. The new HOA president is Tom Wilson, the same guy Karen had harassed over his work truck. One of his first acts was to eliminate most of Karen's ridiculous regulations and return the HOA to its original purpose of maintaining common areas and organizing community events. Karen herself moved away last month. I heard through the neighborhood gossip network that she bought a house in a different development where she could start fresh with a new set of neighbors to terrorize. I actually felt a little sorry for them. The pond has taught me something important about dealing with bullies and bureaucratic tyrants. Sometimes the best strategy is not to fight them directly, but to change the game entirely. By transforming my pool into something that was legally protected, I had made Karen's power irrelevant rather than trying to overcome it. These days, I spend my evenings sitting beside the pond with a cold beer, watching the sunset reflect off the water while frogs sing their ancient songs. The peace I feel now is deeper and more satisfying than anything my old swimming pool ever provided. My backyard is no longer just a place to escape from the world. It has become a small piece of the natural world, thriving in the middle of suburbia. Every bird that visits, every frog that calls it home, and every child who learns something new from observing the ecosystem reminds me that sometimes the best revenge is creating something beautiful. Karen thought she could control me through regulations and bureaucracy. Instead, she taught me that there are always bigger rules, higher authorities, and more creative solutions than petty tyrants can imagine. The frogs and I are living proof that nature always finds a way.